I'm David Garland. I'm a study advisor within the university. I'm also a visual thinking advisor for a variety of groups, but also I'm a dyslexia support tutor. I'm dyslexic myself. So over the last 18 years, I've used a variety of techniques with my students, as well as with the people that I work with within the college and the university. And I work with a variety of international dyslexia organizations. So I've got a whole area there of different types of work that I've done over the years. But exams, obviously, are a stressful period. If you want to sit down, guys at the back, or find somewhere to sit. It's obviously a very stressful point of the year. So what invariably happens is most of you have had your Easter period and you've been working on essays. Only now have you found the time to actually start working on your exams. So with this in mind, you only have 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks at the most possibly for some of you, 7 weeks, to get your exam revision in, which isn't actually very long. So this is how to cram all this in, how to cram all that revision in and get good marks. Most of the students that I work with within my different areas, their marks have gone up by 10, 15, 20%, 30% on some occasions. So it does work. Again, these techniques aren't for everybody, but they are for a good majority of us. The way that I teach, the way that I use these things is very much how we learn when we're at school, in kindergarten. If you think about it, we learn the most between 4 and 8. Why? Because we're drawing things, we're picking things up, we're eating them. We're using very visual, the right side of our brain, very visual way of interpreting the world and making sense of all the knowledge and the information that we're processing. So I'm using that basic technique, the way that we learn in an early age, for exam revision. Basically, it's kindergarten for academics. Okay? So, right, let's start off. The first thing that we've got to remember is pre-planning. Pre-planning. Okay. So the first thing we need to know is know your dates and weeks. When are your exams coming up? You need to kind of begin to plot these, and I'll show you in a minute how you plot your exams. Dates. Create a plan that encompasses 1 exam per week, revision. I'll show you that in a minute. Get past exam papers. That's the most important thing. Most of you can get exam papers online, go to your departments, etc., etc. Some of you will only be able to get 1 exam paper because maybe it's a new course or there's no other exams, etc., etc. What you have to do in this case is begin to ask your tutor or your lecturer about what kind of questions may come up, or if he can give you some kind of other example questions. That's really important. You've got to be outspoken, you've got to ask your department to help you. Get all the data, notes, etc. firstly put into piles for each exam. This is really important. The big thing about exam revision is not about knowledge. It's about order, organisation. 60% order, 40% knowledge. That's how I look at it. The more ordered and organised you are, the more you are able to interpret that information. But more importantly, the way that you actually do your research helps you to kind of put all that data in your head into blocks as well as possibly into piles of notes and things. And of course, a tidy and clean desk or room for preparation. The other thing I will say before I get into the planning is that I'm not a great reader. I see students in the library with 10 books piled up like this, trying to read through them all. The reality is that you only remember 10% of what you read. If you can imagine a pyramid, and you've got reading, you've got listening, you have watching, and you have things like exhibitions, etc., etc. Going down the pyramid, it gets wider and wider. At the top, you only have 10% of what you read. 20% of what you listen, 30%, 40% of what you watch, and so we go down. 90% of what you say and do. And this is the kind of techniques I'll be using, of what you say and do. The more you do, the more you say it back to someone else, the more you actually remember it. And that's the kind of way we're doing it. So it's important that you actually, instead of reading all the time, you're doing specific reading. You're looking at lecture notes, you're looking at chapters, you're looking at revision notes, etc., etc. Also, if you need to get a broad spectrum of the data that you've been looking at through the year in your classes, then I recommend going on to the internet. Yale, Harvard and Berkeley have their own YouTubes where you can actually find lectures that you may have watched before. But also on the internet, you can actually find lots of little videos, short videos about the data that you've been taking in during the year. Things that maybe you're having problems with, science, social sciences, etc., etc. So this is a great way of actually sitting down with your slippers on, a cup of tea and a biscuit, and digesting the information when you get up in the morning. And then you can go back to the particular reading that you have to do. Right, so let's look at planning. Okay, sit the snake. So what I get students to do very much when they're planning the first week of their exams, as you can see on the board over there, I get students to begin to plot when each of their exams are. So what I've got, I can find a pen, is that I will actually begin to put in when I have my exams. So the little green flag are the exams that I've got. I'm already plotted. And I may put in Sociology 201 or whatever they are. Obviously, some of you will have a much greater number of exams. Some of you may have 7, 8 exams. Some of you may only have 3. Some of you may only have 1 exam. It doesn't matter. You still have to plot it. You have to work out in your head when you start doing the revising. If you're tactical, you will actually do it in an order. So if you have 3 weeks before Sociology 201, for example, let's say, for example, let's get rid of that. If Sociology is in week 4, well, then you start now. You can start, say, doing Sociology 201, then you do your other one here, let's say 205, 3, you could do 207, and then at the end here, you go back to revising 201. Again, it's order. You're ordering it, rather than trying to remember everything at the same time. What many students have found is that obviously you can vary this depending. So if you've got 6 exams and you've only got 3 weeks to do it, then you can break the week into 2, and you can begin to kind of 3 days on one, 3 days on another. What's also important when you're studying and revising is that you should not work more than 2 hours at one go. The reason for this is that you get knackered, you get tired, you get exhausted, you begin to lose concentration. 2 hours break, 2 hours break. People tell you this, but we don't always put it into practice. But the thing is that you can learn in different ways, as I said earlier on. You could do 2 hours in the morning watching a documentary about the kind of background information that you need for your particular subject. You may find actually by watching something it saves 5 or 6 hours of reading, and you can note down some of the key things that you have to remember. So creating a visual organizing map like this helps you to make sense of what's coming up. And of course, if you want to, you can quite easily begin to break it down into days. So you can organize the days that you're going to do each thing. So for example, you may break it down into a number of themes. So you may have, say, theme 1 here, theme 2 here, theme 3 here, theme 4 here. We'll talk about themes in a minute, but basically you're breaking it down into some of the major themes within that exam. So on 201, I have 4 themes to remember because I have 3 questions to answer. So I've broken it down to 4 themes, 1 to play with, and the other 3 themes are the ones that I'm going to concentrate on, but I will have each day to go over each of these. Again, it's about cramming data into a small amount of time without feeling that it just overwhelms you. You do it in a relaxed way. Okay, so we're quite happy with the organising of the plan. Let's look at ways that we can begin to remember data. One of the biggest problems that we have in exams is remembering the kind of stuff, the facts, the figures, the concepts, etc., etc. So we need prompts, we need visual prompts that helps us to kind of make sense of this and helps us to take it into the exam without cheating. If you took a lot of notes in, you would be cheating because you'd be sitting there looking through, answering your questions. You can do exactly the same thing without taking any text or any notes whatsoever in with you, but you can have pictures in your head, which we'll show by drawing things in a minute, but also you can take various bits and pieces in with you. The idea behind this is ascribing information. You ascribe data to a picture. I call it the suitcase principle. You can't take all that data in because it would fill a laptop, but you can imagine carrying data in a kind of visual case, taking it into the exam, and the minute you start drawing a picture that you've been ascribing information, data to, you will begin to remember it. So, for example, one of the classic ones is, and I haven't put it up, is hats. So, or in this case, I'm going to use a shirt. I've put various bits and pieces that I have to remember on that shirt. I've got one on an arm, one on a neck, one on the main body of it, but I'm putting bits and pieces. It's a simple way of doing it, but the minute I draw a jacket or a jumper, I can remember things. The same way in that I could, if I wanted to, use a little man, so, and I'm saying looking at philosophy, I can begin to put all my basic information down in this. I could use the same method, if I wanted to, by using an octopus. If you draw an octopus, you put all the little legs, you can put all different words or different authors, etc. to it. It will help you to remember some of the key data that you have to remember. But what you do with this is that you are carrying all this data with you. As we will see in a minute, you can actually put these kind of pictures on the great big mind maps, which I will show you in a minute. But these little things, you can have a whole series of them. You could have a little book of cards with different octopuses on, all the different things in your exam that you have to remember. So you're sitting there having a cup of tea in a cafe and you're going through octopus 1, through octopus 2, you turn the octopus over and you draw the octopus again, and then you put all the data in again, and then you know you remembered it. Again, it's prompting you all the time. Do I remember it? Do I remember it? The other great thing of doing with this technique is that you can actually sit with someone else and talk about the things that you're remembering, so then you can articulate it back. Again, we're going back to the 90% rule of saying and doing. I am talking back to my colleague about utilitarianism. I start with the 1, I start with the 2, I start with the 3. I explain that. I may only have one word. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words. One word may also speak 1,000 words. But that is a trigger. If you can imagine going down a corridor in a hotel with all these doors, with all the numbers on, and all you need is one picture or one word, that is the key that gets you in to that particular room, which opens the door and all the data floods out. Okay? So, a little bit of fun here. So, some of the things that have helped my students, one of the things, of course, is a woolly jumper. Ideal here, an elephant. What we have is an elephant. So what my student did is that he ascribed data to each of the parts. He got to the little jumper, his arms, the nose, the feet. He went in with about 10 pieces of information. Now, not just 10 pieces of information, 10 theorists, for example, their dates, etc., etc., And then the minute he wiggles the nose, he remembers Goffman, 1968. Wiggles the ears, remember Becker, 1963. And off we go. So what this little elephant has done is got about 2 or 3 books worth of data attached to it, because the student is remembering the little by the movement as well as the data that's ascribed. It's called flooding back. Another student of mine loved helicopters. So what he did with the helicopter is he ascribed data to all the various parts of the helicopter, took the helicopter into the exam and had the helicopter there sitting in front of him. He also drew lots and lots of helicopters on his cards, and he kept looking at the different coloured helicopters, a blue one, a green one, a red one. Again, he has all the data there ascribed to him. The same thing applies to cars, tiny little cars. You can open the doors. So what you have is that you've got 15, 20 types of bits of data attached to this one car. So again, another student was drawing cars. One to the bit to the door, etc. The minute you draw these things, it offsets. I think this is the important thing with this lecture. It's about offsetting your memory and data. If you had a choice between remembering a comic book or a textbook on the same subject, you remember the comic book because of the visualization process. So recently, I bought a graphic novel of Jane Eyre. I actually enjoyed it. I actually remembered the story because it was predominantly in pictures and a few text. It was still the same thing. It's still the story, but I've taken out all that surplus text which slows me down. This is what this does. This is the graphic novel. This is the stuff that you walk around with, which has all the data, but you're taking out all the text. You're remembering the key stuff to it. A funny example that a student has done recently on this method is that they have used a back to this method here, but turn that into a football shirt. A student, I love this idea, has memorized all the teams in the Premier League. They have Football League, they have the picture on the wall, they've ascribed to each of the shirts various bits of data. They're doing mathematical, environmental maths, and they have ascribed all the stuff to the shirts, but when he goes into the exam, he takes in 10 or 15 key rings with each of those football jerseys on. No data on it at all apart from the football jersey. But that student's exam results went up because, again, it's something, the minute he touches and he can see, he can grab the data. Okay? Right, so we've got all these various techniques, all these ways of stimulating the data that we've been looking at and we've been kind of trying to revise. What do we do with it? Okay. Well, one of the key things that we do is that we begin to look at a map, a mind map. We need to start preparing all the data that we are doing each week into something that we can see and watch, and we can move with our finger and touch different things. Now, this came out from another visual thinking advisor in America, and these IQ matrix maps are very, very useful, but you can draw your own. You could get a great big piece of paper, an A1, A2 piece of paper, and you draw your own maps. They don't need to be colourful and quite elaborate like that. They can just be words. But what's important is that when you're preparing for an exam, and you're doing a traditional exam where you have 3 or say 3 questions to answer, then you've got to break that down so you can actually see all the kind of the subsequent subsections of that theme. So when I'm preparing for an exam, I will look at the past exam papers. I will find 3 themes, 4 themes. You've got 3 questions, so you need an extra one to play with. 4 themes that come up regularly. Okay, so they're repeated through the years, different wording, but they're basically repeated. So what you then do is that you break your map, as you can see here, into 4 corners. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is one mind map per subject. And each of those corners are a question or a theme that you are looking at within that subject revising. Again, you can imagine if you go back to the order, here we go, theme 1, theme 2, theme 3, theme 4. I've got 3 weeks before my exams. What do? I break it down. I spend with my books, my internet, etc., and I'm there drawing my map on my wall. Now, Tony Buzan, who's renowned as the kind of the godfather of mind mapping, has always said that if you look at something 5 times, it sinks in and stays. So what he says for exam revision, and I found this to be perfectly true, is if you look at this thing in the morning, you look at this thing in the afternoon, and you look at it in the evening, that data that you put on there will sink in your head. Of course, if you start putting all these little things that we've already talked about, for example, little men, shirts, etc., onto that mind map, even hats, for example. You could distinguish between, if you're doing a sociology or management, you need to distinguish between 2 types of theory. You can have a cowboy hat, let's say for one particular theory, you can have a top hat for another. The minute you draw those hats down and you put the word, the author's name, you will begin to remember the data that's associated with that hat. You can then put those hats, for example, down here. You could have a top hat here, you could have a bowler hat here, but you know on that particular aspect of the data that you're trying to remember, there are 2 particular theorists. And the minute you draw those hats, those theorists' concepts and their data and theories will begin to pop out into your head. So you spend a week working on this mind map. The great thing about this is that once you've done that, you then move on to the next subject, and so on. But as we said here, the minute you get to end of week 3 or end of week 4, and you have to start looking for a couple of days to look at exam 201 again, this is done. You spend 3 days just going over that again, looking at it again and again and again and again and again until it makes sense. Right. So, we've got our mind map. The next thing that we have to do, we have to begin to learn how we answer a question. How do we take all this data we've got here into an exam? Well, the example that I always use is that you imagine this being an A to Z of the British Isles. When you're driving, you've got your A to Z in your compartment, and because you drive all the time that route, let's say you drive between here and Manchester, you know it off by heart. If I asked you a question, how do I travel to Manchester using the A road? You could tell me. You get off at junction 31, dum 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 dum, and that's how you do it. Whatever question I asked you about travelling between here and Manchester, you could tell me because you do it every single day. Same process. This is your A to Z. This is the thing that's in the back of your head because you've memorised all the different bits and aspects, all these little routes, all the different theorists and concepts, etc., etc. So, when I'm answering an exam question, the thing that I do, first of all, is that I go into the exam, and I begin to lay out my answer with all the data that I've been looking at over the couple of weeks. So the first thing I do, I've got my introduction. I draw this on my piece of paper. I've got my introduction. I have 2 or 3 points. I put on the left-hand side, a couple of words maybe, even a picture to remember. I then have a for or an against, not always, but you usually have 2 sections or maybe one section, but usually two sections. You have to compare and contrast or try to argue, and you break these down again into paragraphs, 1, 2, 3. You put A, B, C, and then put a word or whatever you have to remember, a theorist, a picture. You do exactly the same for the next one, and then you finish off with your conclusion where you have 2 points. Now, what my students do is that they time themselves. They will put the alarm clock up when they're doing their mock exams, and they will take themselves 10 minutes. What this does is that it helps you then that when you are writing your question, your answer, is that this is a guide. And it then flows much quicker because you know exactly what you have to write and the order. Now, what does this do? Well, what this does is tighten up your argument. It makes your critical analysis much better. It helps the reader and the marker to show that you are consistent with your answer, okay, etc., etc. Now, of course, how does this work if you go into an exam where you've got multiple choice or you've got a number of questions to answer? Well, what you can do is that you can scrap all this kind of data, but you can have a spider type diagram. So what we could have over here, I'll show quickly, is that I could have almost like a sun's rays. I'm looking through the paper very quickly, and I'm putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And if there's things, key words or key things I need to remember for each of those, I can then put the word in or put the thing in I have to remember. Because what happens in the exam stress is that when you go into the exam, you're spending more and more time trying to remember something, you don't remember it, and then you lose time. So with this, by doing the 10-minute first, you're getting all that data in, you're all wound up, you're all revved up. You get in and you put all the data down, and then you go back to that to help you to put in the key data to answer the questions. Okay? Right. So, I'm doing these. This is what I will do in the exam. Now, what's important most of all with this is that as we've been finding over the last few years, rather than sitting in the library reading and reading and reading and waiting to go into the exam, what you're actually doing, the better way of doing it, is to actually do a mock exam a day. Oh my God, you might say, that's a lot. No, because if you do 3 of these, it takes you 30 minutes. Okay? 30 minutes this takes you. All right? 10 minutes per question. So what you're doing is that if you did your revision in the morning, watch some TV, the videos of your lectures, your notes, do a bit of reading, you then do a 30-minute mind maps, and then you maybe even check the answers later on. Or, even better, do these in the morning, in the afternoon, and then do one question for 45 minutes directly after. And then you check the answers later on through your notes and other things you've got. What you're doing with this technique is that you're testing yourself. As one of my students said to me the other day, I'm knowing my enemy. I'm knowing what I'm taking on. I am preparing myself for realistic conditions. I am timing myself. I am facing my worst fear, i.e. the exam. But more importantly, I am beginning to actually use the data that I've accumulated. And if something that you've got wrong or you haven't added in your answer, you go back to your mind map and you put it up there. You're adjusting, you're adding, adjusting, adding, adjusting all the time until you feel that you've actually got it correct. So, what we found is that when you go through your schedule for your week. Where's my little mind map? Here we go. So when I'm doing the snake and I've got certain days, then I'm beginning to see my progression. How much information have I accumulated? How much data have I actually got into my head? And also, more importantly, how much data am I actually able to write down? And I think that's the hardest thing that most of us find. How much do we really know on this exam? Because most of us don't know until we actually go into the exam. For me, that's rubbish. You can do the exam every day and you're testing yourself every day of how much data that you know. Okay, so any questions? Any questions on this technique? Maybe people got some exams, types of exams that they're a bit concerned about which don't fit into this particular way. Any ideas? Any questions, please? No questions? Everyone's quiet. Because of filming possibly, that's why. Okay, so I do recommend again that the site that I've shown you can be very, very useful. It will go through all the stuff that I've already done. It's at dailymotion.com. Again, the thing what you have to remember is the order that I've shown you. The first thing you've got to do is to create this snake and put down exactly and map out when this data, when these exams are due to arrive. You then have to work out the themes and the type of data that you have to look at, which comes through the mind maps, through the various exam papers from previous years. You then have to find different ways that you can make data mobile, and how you do that is that you can, as we said earlier on, you can actually begin to break it down into little men or helicopters or elephants or whatever you want to do, but you can make it mobile by having a little book, and you can sit on the bus and you can go over and over and over again, and then that data can then go on to all the large mind maps that you are preparing. And how do you know that that data is sinking in? Well, as we said, you then go back to, by using these every day, you read and then test yourself in the afternoon or the evening on a mock exam, and then you carry on exactly the same the following day. All right? Okay, well, thank you for turning up, and good hunting with your exams. Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.